Okay, now we have a big shift in the course from painting the big picture to having a close examination of a number of key passages. I can't possibly go through the whole of the sermon. This is piecemeal, and to get the flavour of what we're doing, you need to see it in context and in the light of the total vision. Now, in case you don't realise what my tactic has been, it's been to paint you the big picture, because unless you get the big picture, you won't see the detail. Detail, big picture go together, and you could go the other way. I could have started looking closely at a particular passage and going out from there to paint the big picture. But because of limited time, maybe if I'd taught this as a full seminary course, that might have been the way I'd chosen to go. But we've got limited time, and even if you don't get it all in terms of the close reading of these texts, if you get the big picture, that bifocal vision, when you come to looking at a particular passage to preach on it or teach it, you'll be able to see that detail in the light of the whole. If you think in terms of a classical painting, a good painting, a good painting can affect us in one of two ways. Not just to look at it, because if you want to understand visual art, you need to see not just the way you look at it, but in a sense the way it looks at you. The way it looks at you, its impact on you, its effect on you, and that is usually one of two things. Say, for example, these are works of art here. What might strike me is there's something about the composition as a whole that affects me in some way. Saying, wow, this is beautiful. This has this effect on me. That's one way, the picture as a whole, or else, more commonly for most of us who are not trained to appreciate art, there's something in the painting that strikes us. Take, for example, this over here. Dürer, who is a great artist, he's using very simple means, woodcut, it's very stark, black and white, cartooning kind of stuff. You have the big picture. What's this a big picture of? The resurrection of Jesus. And you have him here holding his hand in blessing. He holds this staff in his hand, banner. You have angels up here, and you've got, what you got down here? The soldiers. Okay, and it's a very carefully crafted composition, a bifocal picture. The earthly thing here is this stuff here, and then from heaven, notice it's encased here in a cloud, right? Notice the cloud there, and the angels, okay, here. Now, what might strike you is, okay, this is a good dramatic picture as a whole. It's a simple composition, it's stark, it's dramatic, okay? But this is one case where you're unlikely, really, the impact of this is unlikely to be as a whole. This is designed for what to have impact on us? Okay, what's the centre of the picture? Here. That's where your eyes go. You're meant to not to see all these details, or you're not meant to analyse it and see the careful composition of this artist, but you are meant to see what? The risen Lord Jesus. And if you look closely, you can see his wounds there. But there's the glory, not the crown, but the nimbus of glory and so on. And he appears, wounded hand, but that hand is held in blessing and the banner of victory. Okay, so you can any picture, you can look at it two ways. There's a whole and focusing on a particular detail, and that particular detail gives you the key to the whole. So you work both ways. The first passage I want to look at is, or the first two passages I want to look at with you now, is in chapter 4. First of all, 1 to 13, and then 14 through to 16. Now, some background to this. First of all, linguistic stuff, and then a general point. The key word in this passage is katapausis, and its verb, katapauo. Now, katapausis is rest. Pauo is to stop doing something. Katapausis is very strong, to stop something completely. It intensifies the activity. Now, this is used in this passage in two ways. And let me warn you right from the beginning, because unless you see the punning going on, what's punning? Always? Wordplay. Words used in the same word used in two different ways. Now, in the Old Testament, in the Septuagint, because that's the Bible of Hebrews, katapausis and its synonym, anapausis, are used in two ways, but particularly katapausis. First of all, it's a time of rest. A time of rest. And secondly, it's also a place of rest. Time of rest, place of rest. Now, in the Bible, there are four, and in Hebrews, 4 different times of rest, which are in fact the same time of rest. Now, you don't have bifocal vision, you have, try even more, quator focus, fourfold vision. Okay. Foundationally, most importantly, you have that what's the foundational time of rest is the 7th day, when God rested from all his work, very important, and he blessed and sanctified the day. Now, normally God blesses people or living things, like animals. People, things, so that they're fruitful, multiply. And he blesses, he sanctifies people or things. So he sanctifies people, he sanctifies things like the tabernacle and its utensils, the holy offerings, they become holy. But here you get, and this is odd, he sanctifies and blesses a day, a time. Very, very odd, totally, utterly countercultural. Okay, you have day 7, God's day of rest. Now that's foundational, God's day of rest. So if God talks about my rest, what's the first level of meaning? This day, the 7th day. Now, as you know then, Israel, later on in its history, God gave them their basic calendar, if you like, their routine, that just as God worked for 7 days and rested worked for 6 days, they would work together with God for 6 days, and they would rest with God on which day? 7th day. And he gave them the Sabbath as a gift before he gave the commandment on the Sabbath. So there's the gift of the Sabbath, the 7th day. Very special, unique to Old Testament. Nothing like this anywhere in comparative religion. And then in Hebrews, the 7th day is today. Today, if you hear his voice. Today is the day of rest. Which day is that? What? Today, and it's not generally, it's not just now, but today in the congregation is today when the congregation assembles for the divine service. So the day of the assembly of the congregation, is the time of rest, the today. And then lastly, the time of rest is the eternal rest of God in heaven, eternity, but also from another point of view, in the age to come. So this age is the age of work. The age to come is the age of rest. If you like, earth is the place for work, heaven, eternity is the place of rest. So this is one dimension. Can you see the extent of this? Keep this in mind when we read this following passage and how the arguments shift here across those four dimensions. But katapausis is not just the term for a day of rest, it's also for a place of rest. Now, to make strict sense of that, in its most obvious level, there's many factors that come into play here, but most obviously it's geared towards people who were once nomads. And if you're a nomad, you have no place where you settle down. You have no place of residence. But then nomadic people, since the beginning of time, have settled down somewhere from nomadic life, usually of animal husbandry, to agriculture. And so instead of wandering around all over the place, you settle down in one place. Your place of rest is your place of residence. Now, that's not the sense in which this is used, but that's kind of background. So what is the first place of rest in the Old Testament? It's the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey, the land of Israel. God promises to give his people, nomadic people, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, they lived in the land, but they lived in the land as nomads, wanderers, strangers. And God promised to give them the land, not to them, but their seed would inherit the land. They lived in Egypt, but they didn't have rest in Egypt. They were there as foreigners, aliens, with no property rights. They couldn't own land. They were not landowners. And then for 40 years, they wandered in the desert as nomads. And then finally, they entered their rest, which is God's rest for them, the promised land. Now, so that's on the most physical level. Joshua brought the people of Israel. By the way, Joshua is Jesus, same name in Greek. Joshua, Jesus, Joshua. Joshua brought the people into the place of rest that God provided for them. Not their land, but his land. They inherited his land. But if you read the Pentateuch closely, in the Bible closely, you realize that Israel never fully entered the land. Why? They couldn't take possession of it because they were always... Who said that? Yeah.
Idolatry.
Idolatry is a side factor, but they never occupied the whole land, because as long as they lived there, there were always foreigners there or other nations there. And it's interesting that the Pentateuch, which is the foundational document for Israel, so the story of Israel beginning with creation, Abraham, patriarchs, Exodus, journey through the desert, and ends with Deuteronomy, the sermon of Moses for Israel about to enter their rest. The Pentateuch ends there. Now, if this was a human novel, it would be most unsatisfactory because the story's not finished. Unfinished story. The question is, well, did they or did they not? But spiritually speaking, then, Israel never entered the promised land ever fully. So they were always still entering it. Now, the writer of the Hebrews is going to do some place in that. It's because he said, if Joshua had given them rest, then God would not have said at a later time through David, they shall enter my rest. Because if the land was the place of rest, and if that was the rest of God, well, then it would be past tense. It wouldn't be in the future at all. The land is a place of rest. And then most interestingly, the tabernacle first, but then the temple was a place of rest. Not Israel's place of rest primarily, but God's place of rest with his people. God takes residence, settles down with his people who come into the land in a particular city. Which city was it? Jerusalem. There the temple was built, and the temple is once again bifocal. It is both God's place of rest, the place of rest for his ark, and at the same time it's the place of rest for Israel. So when the people of Israel go up to the temple to participate in the divine service, they enter what place? They enter God's place of rest, the place of rest where God provides rest for his people. So bifocal, God's rest, their rest together. And that rest is on which day? Sabbath day. So temple, earthly temple. Then coming to Hebrews, the place of rest is not Jerusalem, the temple of Jerusalem, which is probably still standing, but what's the place of rest for the people of God, the New Testament people of God? No, that's in the Gospels. That's Matthew, where Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." It happens in the divine service, but the place that they rest and find rest is heaven. They enter the heavenly place of rest. So heaven, that's their homeland rather than the land of Israel. The heavenly city rather than the city of Jerusalem. The heavenly house, I should say, rather than temple, rather than the earthly house, Jerusalem. Okay, that's the theology of rest. Now, if you just take that, then you've basically got the whole of the chapter. That's the picture that's being painted. So can just stop here and pause. Have you got it? So punning, entry into rest, is both entry into the time of rest, but the primary reference is to the place of rest. By faith, we Christians enter God's rest, the rest that he provides for us. The time of rest, the place of rest. And yet we have still to enter into the time of rest and the place of rest. Notice the tension between those two. Any questions? Good, this is perfectly clear. Oh no.
Well, expanding on that, modern day Judaism.
Yes.
And the land.
Yes.
So they're still looking for the land. Are they still seeking that place of rest? The issue is not just the land and the kingdom, but that actual place of rest as well.
You won't understand half of what's happening in Israel unless you see that this is not primarily, well, for some people it's political. You know, you get Messianic Jews for whom this is a political thing, but not religious Jews. Yes, this is the place of rest. And hence they don't want to give up any of, well, they don't have all of it, because there's that whole part across the Jordan which belongs to the Jordan, and then there's stuff down in the Sinai Peninsula which belongs to Egypt, and then there's stuff the West Bank and in Gaza which doesn't belong to them, and they don't want to give up anything. Why? Because this is God's land to them. This is their place of rest. And the Messianic Jews one of the things that they're looking forward is the time when the Messiah will come and kick all those people. That's one dimension. Judaism isn't one-dimensional. There's many different Judaisms. But one dimension is that they will kick off all the people from the land, and then at last, what has never happened in human history is that God's people, Israel, will fully occupy the land, will come to be. One of the big bones of contention politically, as you know, is Jewish settlements in the West Bank. Now, this is not, the people that are doing are ultra-Orthodox religious Jews. They do it for partly political reasons, but behind political reasons are theological reasons, what you're talking about. They are helping God out. They are preparing for the coming of the Messiah. Yes?
Forgive me if I'm a little slow, but the time of rest and the place of rest are in the divine service, where we both have time and residence in the heavenly sanctuary. Absolutely. During the service.
Yes. Well, not yet residence.
Well, I mean that.
Yes. Okay. Just the full residence. We are visitors. If you want to have pictures, into the place of rest, but we are not yet prepared to settle down there permanently. So there's two apparently contradictory stated. We who have believed have entered the place of rest. And then he says, strive to enter the place of rest. Can you see there's that tension? We have reached that place, and if you take it, we still have to reach that place, but reach that place in the sense of not having to just visit it, but being able to settle down there permanently.
Like buying a home, you go in and visit it, but you cannot take residence.
Yeah, or even if you rent it for a while, it's not yet yours. I think renting and then owning would be a more exact analogy, although that has limitations too. Yes?
Two questions. One is looking at the law aspect of the Sabbath command. Is there a sense there that the Sabbath command is also a reminder of what was lost in the fall?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Okay, well, this is because why? The foundation of all of this is here.
Yep.
Because, in a sense, that seventh day was both a time and a place of rest for God.
Right.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. And number two is it also right to say that when you walk into the congregation gathers together for the divine service, that their human homeland, their human citizenship is checked at the door?
That's right. And what I find, if I can follow through, what I find theologically offensive is that you have flags in the chancel.
You're not the only one. Can you write an article that we could read with our members?
No, you can't do it as a foreigner. You've got to do it yourselves. Well, I've given you the material to deal with it. Okay, and don't tackle it head on. You've got to be pastoral. There's good reasons, and you need to know the history, your own history. Why is it that not Lutherans, but some denominations did this? And what's the theology that brings this? Luther always says if you're going to correct an abuse, an idol, you don't remove the idol, because you might remove the idol from there, but you don't remove the idol from here. You've got to deal with the idolatry that embodies.
We did it successfully at the congregation, my congregation, but it took great patience and time, and they chose to do it.
And they chose to do it, and that was Luther's thing. You don't choose, they choose. Right. And you teach and preach gently, patiently, until they say, yay, we're happy with this, and in fact, it works better if it's out there.
It went over to the school building.
Well, no, you can have it at the porch. No. Narthex. I've seen it recently. Shepherd in the City, I think, has it in the at the Narthex or somewhere I've been, and struck me that's the place for it to be. And maybe even in the nave, I don't find that anywhere near as offensive as in the sanctuary proper, the chancel. Okay, now how do
So you check your human citizenship, your homeland, at the door.
you leave it behind? You don't have to renounce it, but it's not that you leave it there, but it doesn't count here. It doesn't count here. When you go to church, you cease to be Americans and you become the children of Adam and the children of the heavenly King. Okay? That's the status. That's what we are here in this place. And to some extent, if you like, it's a sanctuary from politics, church should be, rather than the sanctification of politics. Yeah. Somebody else had hand up. Good. Now,
Comment on the fullness of David and Solomon's conquest, and therefore then degenerating thereafter, but there was a fullness of possession.
there was fullness of political possession, but if you go, God's saying in the end of Judges that he will leave the remnants of, because of their idolatry, their refusal to listen to the voice of God, God will leave the remnants of the nations in the land as a scourge for the people. And there were various attempts, political attempts to deal with it. What did Solomon do? David just created the empire. I don't know whether you realise that most of the people in David's empire would have been non-Jewish citizens, not descendants of Abraham. He incorporated lots of different ethnic groups into his kingdom. Now, Solomon, in building the temple and in building his palace, conscripted these people to do levy labour. They were second-rate citizens, the way Christians are second-rate citizens in Islamic countries. But also, if you like, to diminish their political and economic status, to gradually. Now, the hope was, he couldn't annihilate them, but to somehow reduce their power so that they could be assimilated. Unsuccessfully, I might add. And you remember then, once the northern kingdom was taken into captivity, the Assyrians brought other foreigners in, and then you had the mixture of people of other ethnic backgrounds together with the Jews that had been left behind in the northern kingdom. In the post-exilic period, then, there was never any time when, or maybe not never, the closest that they came to political independence was during the brief period of the Maccabees. But there was huge Hellenistic populations within the kingdom of the Maccabees as well. How are we going? Now, two little introductory observations before we look closely at the passage. First of all, every time I come here to the USA, it strikes me that you are a nation of workaholics. Not just workaholics out there. The number of people that I meet who have not just one job, but two jobs, some three jobs, is enormous. That's different to Australia. And I don't want to go into the economic and social reasons for it. But secondly, what strikes me is that your status and worth depends on your job. The first question people ask is, what do you do? And they do it even in the church. In my church, usually people ask either where were you born or who was your father? Oh, Kleinig. Which Kleinig? That's the normal question. Nobody's asked me that question ever over here. Work as being of supreme importance, determining worth. Thirdly, even in the church, it seems to me that what's emphasized in the church is work. Most pastors are not lazy. In fact, most of you don't just work the same as other people. What do you have? Do you have a 48-hour week, 50-hour week? What normally in employment? What's the normal length? 40-hour week. Okay, 40-hour week. Does any pastor work for 40 hours?
That's the first day.
That's the first day. Okay. How hard pastors have to work, and the reason they do that is that the people expect them to do much more than the basic ministry work of ministry. You know that better than I. And the only way you can fulfill their expectations is by becoming a workaholic. And I fancy that most of you are workaholics. I don't know, I can't see into your hearts, I don't know your life story, but your wife, you ask your wife when you get home, am I a workaholic? And she'll be the best judge for that.
She'll have to be awake for that, though.
What?
She'll have to be awake for that, though.
That's right. There's the problem. Yes. Yes. So people are workaholics, and when you go to church, the emphasis, the whole orientation of the congregation is how do we get people to do what? Work, participate, to do something. And participation in worship is not a matter of receiving gifts, but doing. And so you have the strange division, and we have the same strange category. Instead of baptized and unbaptized members, or communicant and not communicant members, you have the strange category of active members. That's telling, active members, because that determines your status and worth within the church. But it also indicates to the world out there that to be a Christian is a matter of doing, working. Now, the tragedy of this is both within the church and in society at large, and this is becoming more and more the case in my own country, Australia, it's all around the West, is that people don't even rest when they rest. So the problem of insomnia, anxiety, stress, that you can't switch off when you go to bed. So sleeping is not really resting, but it's work in a different mode. And most sadly of all, when do people work hardest? On their holidays. Our inability to rest and to find rest. Do you realise that this is not new? This is part of the old Adam. What drives us to work is because we have to justify ourselves. We promote ourselves. We manage our own lives. That's basically sin and idolatry. And all human beings are equally bedeviled with this. I'm just having a go at you to get you stirred up, to provoke you. But this is a common human problem. We feel impelled to work because to look out after ourselves and our families, our communities, because if I don't look out after number one, no one else will. If I don't work to promote myself, no one else will. Work, no end of work. And many of the problems that we have at every level have to do with this inability to rest. A restless society full of restless people that takes its toll. One final thing before we go into chapel. Is that the second? No, it's the first bill still. Pagan religions everywhere. If you want to say, what's the point of paganism? All pagan religions, from animism through to the highest pagan religions, say Islam, the task of human beings is to do what? To work. Not just for themselves, but to work for the gods. And so in paganism, what's worship? Worship is doing work for your God. So the duty of pagan people was to look after their gods, to build their temples, maintain their temples, provide food and entertainment and clothing and resources for their gods. But in paganism, worship is work and work is worship. Now, God, yeah, it's at number 10.
I mean, it's the bell of the chapter. Did you say it was the first bell?
Okay. Lastly, in Israel, the most fundamental ritual is not work, but anti-work. No work. So it's an anti-ritual ritual. Let's go and do some anti-ritual ritualing.